I'm Kyle Reese of the OneJax Institute at the University of North Florida, and Theology Thursday is a partnership between OneJax, the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida, and the Istanbul Cultural Center. We started Theology Thursday a few weeks ago in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and we wanted it to be a place for people of goodwill to come together, to learn, and to be encouraged. But certainly after this week and these days in the life of our nation, on top of the continuing pandemic, we need a place where we can be encouraged. We need a place where we can offer up our prayers, our laments, our frustrations, and a place where we can think about how we walk forward together. So I can think of no better guides to help us on this Thursday night than our two faith leaders who will lead us in the time together. Reverend Tiffany McCall is the senior pastor of the First United Methodist Church here in Jacksonville, Florida. Tiffany, welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Kyle, for having me. It is a delight to come and just share my experience and my thoughts as to what is going on today. And I have to just begin by saying this is a very difficult time for me to express those thoughts, but I'm going to do the very best that I can. I was reminded this week of an archaeologist by the name of Clifford Gerzett. And he was famous for establishing the symbolism of culture. And he talks about how people have to have symbols, and symbols are what guide us throughout our culture. And I was remembering a little bit of this and thinking about the symbols that guide and lead America. And we have so many, you know, we have of course, our flag is a symbol of who we are. And then we have, as Christians, the cross is a symbol of who we are. This is something that guides us and leads us. And then, of course, there are other symbols within our nation that that kind of guide us. Even the traffic light is a symbol, as simple as that may be. And our police officers are a symbol. And police officers, they symbolize justice. When justice is gone, or when any symbol is missing, the people are left empty. And people don't really know what to do or how to move through things without those symbols. And when justice has fallen, a symbol that people have guided themselves by for ancient times, and when justice is gone, people become distressed. They become angry. They tend to do things out of character because justice is something that we need. Personally, looking at the news, looking at everything that's going on, and being a Black woman in America, I have been horrified by what I've seen. I took a look at the video and I wept. I lamented before God because I was just troubled at how could you sit there and suck the life out of another human being in that fashion. It broke my heart to hear this man call out for his mother. I too am a mother. I'm a mother of 3 wonderful, beautiful Black children, and one happens to be a male. I have a father who is a Black man, brothers who are also Black men, and well established, but none of that matters when there's no justice for them. I was reminded of the fear the fear of letting my son go out. Every day I have to talk to him when he leaves. I have to find out where he's going. What is he doing? What time is he returning? You know, I can even remember not wanting him to have his driver's license for this very reason, being stopped by police officers. So it's when there's no justice, there's a constant dis-ease in the life of the people. And so I am at this point in where I am, I'm sad. I'm still very sad, and I'm very angry. Sometimes I feel like I'm just bleeding with disgust as I look across and see what's really happening in our society. And for me, I just ask my brothers and sisters of faith who are not Black, but who see what is actually happening. I ask them to think deeply about what you see. And I remind you that what we saw happening to Floyd is exactly what happens systemically with Black people in this country on an ongoing basis, being choked the life out of you. That's what racism actually does to us. It just really makes you feel like you can't breathe. This is a deeply spiritual as well as a physical thing. And I'm just horrified, Kyle. I don't even know at this point where to go from here. But what I do know is that change must come, and that Christians cannot stand on the sideline and watch these things take place and not intervene. I believe that we cannot call ourselves church or people of God if we don't stand up firmly for justice. For everyone who has been washed by the blood, who has been baptized by the fire, is called by God to live for God. And that, for me, that means justice, and justice for everyone. I would not call myself a Christian if I did not fight for justice. And without justice, there's no hope. And so I just challenge people to really look at what happened and let that stir in your soul, because the only way that we will alleviate racism is really reaching for the soul, really reaching for spiritual renewal. It just will not happen with litigation, because laws are changed every day. And so we have to, that's why the church is such a necessity in this. And so I'm looking for a movement of the church. I think it's time at this point where we remember who we really are and what we're really called to do. I just don't believe that that we should remain the way we are, remain silent beneficiaries of prestige and privilege. I believe that it's time for us to do something. And so I do have a prayer here, Kyle. I don't know if you want me to go into that, but I can offer a prayer. Okay. Gracious God, our Father, our Mother, our King. We come in a time of protest, pandemic, and deep deprivation and disparity. We come seeking your guidance for a way forward for our nation. We recognize the oppression and the systematic racism that is destroying Black men and women in this country. We organize and we have come together to seek your face, to search for a way forward, and to simply ask, oh God, for a precious move of your Holy Spirit. Father, we ask that you look upon us mercifully, for there are many this day who bear the indignity and justice around us. Raise up leaders in every land around this world. Leaders who would stand up for order, equality, and justice. Grant unto us, O great God, our Father, the grace to discern your will as we labor to do what you have called us to do and to fulfill our vocation in social and spiritual lives of many. Sharpen our intellect so that we may be able to move when you call us to move, so that we may move beyond the prejudiceness of our world and proceed to do the great things that you've called us to. Help us to be humble, guide our minds so that we may live out meaningful lives, and help us to understand the problems of the poor and the oppressed, of the underprivileged and the lonely. Help us to remember our first love, you, O God, for you've loved us first, and so therefore we love you. Shower down upon our nation a thirst and a hunger, Father, for justice and for mercy for all humanity. In the precious name of Jesus, we do pray. Amen.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you for guiding and being a clear voice in this time in our community. And we pray to God that we would have ears to hear. Our other conversation partner tonight is Rabbi Jonathan Lubliner, who is the Jack F. Shorstein Rabbinic Chair at the Jacksonville Jewish Center. And as Rabbi Lubliner prepares to share, I would remind all of you on YouTube Live that if there are questions or conversations you want us to have, we would love for you to do that. But Jonathan, thanks for being with us and for leading us tonight.
Tiffany, thank you for sharing that. And there really are no words that I can adequately communicate. I don't have Black children who go out there, but for all of us who do have children who go out in the world and we're worried enough as it is, this is just one more heartbreaking and so wrong and so unnecessary to put on the burden of young people's shoulders or their parents or a community. I find myself sometimes these days almost wondering if I'm in a dream world. I wake up in the mornings with a pit in my stomach, with a feeling of pit in my stomach, a vague sense of unease. Our congregation has become almost exclusively virtual. There are very few people whom I work with and know and care about deeply that I see in person, other than my wife and children, going home to them at night. That's really the only close human contact that I have, and I'm more grateful than ever. So sometimes the house can feel small with 3 teenage boys. What gets me through these days, sometimes it's hard to get through these days. There are times when prayer feels like lead. There are times when it's hard to be motivated. I live without the kind of clear boundaries of home and school and office, synagogue. And I struggle at times. And I have good days or better days and bad days. There was a text I wanted to share. If I pull it up on the screen, it's from the post-disabled participant screen sharing. Maybe I can't, unless Samet allows me. Well, I can read it from the screen. Forgive me for a moment. But it's a text from the Babylonian Talmud. And it is from a story about Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in the 3rd century of the Common Era, 3rd century of the Christian era, about 300, what folks might say, AD. And it so happened that once his student, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan entered to visit him and said, "Is your suffering welcome to you? Do you desire it?" And Rabbi Chia said to him, "I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward. One who welcomes his suffering with love is rewarded." But Rabbi Yochanan then said, "If you do not welcome this suffering or its reward, give me your hand." Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up and restored him to health. It then happened that Rabbi Yochanan himself fell ill, and his colleague, Rabbi Hanina, entered to visit him. And he asked his colleague and friend, "Is your suffering welcome to you?" Rabbi replied, "I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward." And Rabbi Hanina said to him, "Give me your hand." He gave him his hand, and Rabbi Hanina stood him up and restored him to health. The rabbis asked, why did Rabbi Yochanan wait for Rabbi Hanina to restore him to health? If he was able to heal his student, then surely he could have healed himself. And the sages answer, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison, but depends on others to release him from his shackles. And I love that teaching because I think those of us who pastor and care for other people are often ourselves in need of care. And we can just as easily be on one side of the caregiving or the other. There are times when I feel like Rabbi Yochanan healing his student, and there are times when I feel like Rabbi Yochanan, who is the patient himself and needs to be healed by someone else. The fact, though, is in both cases, when their colleague or teacher come in, they ask about where they are at mentally. We might assume that there is suffering can be a teacher. Brokenness can be a way of finding a new wholeness. And so no one makes any assumption about what the person needs. The question may seem obvious, but in both instances, they ask the patient, where are you? What are you feeling? Do you want to be lifted to another place? And I think in this time, whether we look at the events of the news or just that sense of isolation and distancing we have, or this endlessness of where we don't see, we know that there will be an end to this pandemic, but we don't know exactly what it will look like, and we don't know when. And for those of us who have to worry about our congregations and even about the fiscal health and well-being of our congregations, because that is coming down the pike if it's not already here. The story from the Talmud reminds me of being where people are at, asking the questions of where their minds and their thoughts are, and of myself as well. Too often we fall into platitudes or make assumptions about where people are at. But in both cases, the prisoner cannot free himself. You need somebody else's hand. And in this time, it's going to be a figurative hand because we can't clasp one another's hands physically. But the importance of finding those who can help unlock whatever prison we find ourselves in. And so that story speaks to me about vulnerability, companionship, and humility to realize that all of us are caregivers to ourselves and to the people that surround us. And just as we are caregivers, we must be caretakers. And that's an important part of caregiving, because we know that when we give to others, we give back to ourselves. It's much harder to learn how to be able to take in the right spirit, as people take in the wrong spirit all the time. But to take in the right spirit is an important lesson as well. As far as the things, the spiritual religious acts that keep me sane, and on course, one of them is the Jewish Sabbath. On the Sabbath, I unplug. And for those who may be familiar with some of the more strict observances of the Sabbath, you don't have to be Jewish, and you don't have to embrace them with the same degree of commandedness that I might presume or feel as a Jew. But I would wholeheartedly recommend to folks to take the Sabbath one day a week to unplug. This is my lifeline. It's also my enemy. And this is depressing. And one day a week, I set it aside, and it feels so liberating not to be enslaved to that technology. And I know I'm not going to be answering calls, and If there's an emergency, well, we have a way to be reached in emergencies, but otherwise my phone is off. I am on, but my phone is off. And that really has helped. That has created a boundary in time, especially when I don't have boundaries in space. The other thing that I find very, very healing is music, and music in general, but specifically, there are wordless melodies that were sung by Hasidic Jews. They were mystics with origins in Eastern Europe in the 1700s. Today they are seen as bastions of ultra-Orthodoxy, but they were, quite revolutionary in their time, in that they sought to infuse a spiritual joy. And these melodies, they're wordless, but they speak in their wordlessness a melody of the heart. And some of them do have words, if not words in the traditional sense, words to think about while you're singing the melody. One of my favorite is a melody that's attributed to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Today, he is buried in what is today the Ukraine. He was the great-grandson of the founder of the Hasidic movement. He did not have a long life. He died at 38. He was born in the 1770s and died in 1810. He was a wonderful storyteller, and one melody of his in particular has these words that go with it. Imata ma'amin sheyecholin lekalkel, ta'amin sheyecholin letaken. If you believe something can be broken, then believe it can be fixed. And I find myself thinking of those words often, and sometimes singing those melodies to myself. I could be in the car, I could be alone, and they have a pathos to them that give me some hope that if it can be broken, it can be fixed. And that's a statement of faith, but it's more than a leap of faith. It's a leap of action too, because we help break the world in which we live. We can help put it back together, and that's where I have to bring myself to, even when I'm not willing to go there. I have to pull myself along, but that's the place that I invariably have to keep coming back to, and that's all she wrote.
Well, thank you both for sharing. We just have a couple minutes, so there is a common theme that I think that I heard from both of you. Tiffany, you spoke of it's time for the church to be church. And Jonathan, you talked about the power of community, of one hand being reaching out to another in order to provide healing. So I'm wondering, in these last couple of minutes, very briefly, where are you finding encouragement from your faith community today to keep up the task and the work that we've been called to do in this day and time?
What, you want me to go first?
That'd be great.
Okay. For me, the faith comes from conversations like this, and conversation with other family members and friends that they're there to support and comfort, and just we kind of hold each other's hand to kind of move through this process and just kind of discern what's really going on and where God is actually taking us. The other thing is what helps me is meditation. Just simple. I love what Rabbi said about turn this thing off. Yes, this phone has just become a problem. And so turning it off and making sure that I find space and time for just me and God, and just uh, kind of contemplative type of prayers, and just sitting with God for a little while. That has really helped me kind of move through some of this. I thought I wouldn't be as emotional tonight as I was all week. I thought I had kind of calmed down, but then I felt like I was quite emotional. So thank you so much for letting me answer.
You honor us with your presence and your emotion and all that you are. So thank you for sharing that. Jonathan, where are you finding encouragement from your community?
I'm blessed with congregants who, some of whom are wonderful in reaching out to see how I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that means a tremendous amount to me, because pro forma, they're always saying, how are you doing? But when it's just the equivalent of, how are you? Good day, good afternoon. And when they're really reaching out, and that affirms for me, knowing how good it feels when somebody genuinely has gone out of their way to ask me how I am doing, from my own congregation. That also inspires and reminds me of what it is when I'm on the other side of that. I often find if I'm getting into a funk or feeling blue, getting out of my own skin and calling people and asking about them, that feels good too. So it's caretaking and caregiving, and that to me is, I find God in the space between people, and when that space, in some ways, the smaller that space is, the more powerful God's presence is in that space. So rather than, there are times when I could just, close the shades and close the door and, not see anybody or do anything. But that's exactly the moment where I forced myself to make that call to see how somebody is. And as soon as they picked up, I'm glad that I did. And then the one after that, and the one after that, and the one after that. And then I've been on the phone with folks for an hour, and I feel better. It just is. It's a medicine, and that's where I find a sense of God these days more than anything else. Is that in the comfort that genuine caring about other people, or hearing that in other people's voices. That to me is encouragement in a very powerful way.
Well, you two have been an encouragement to us. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And to the two of you, I sincerely thank you for being who you are and for gifting our community with your presence. Again, thank you for all of you who have joined us via YouTube Live. and the encouraging words that you have given. Tiffany, you'll be glad to know that our mutual friend Corellis Bryant is active and listening. So Theology Thursday is a partnership between the OneJax Institute at the University of North Florida, the Istanbul Cultural Center, and the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida. And we gather together every Thursday night in these days just to encourage one another and to remember that in this journey, we're not alone. So Tiffany, Jonathan, thank you for leading us. And we look forward to being back together next Thursday night. Have a great evening, everyone.
Take care. God bless.
Bye-bye.